We know the Miami Dolphins are going to have a general manager vacancy, but who are they competing against this upcoming cycle? We look at potential others who may be in the GM pool here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. And a special thank you to all of you who have helped make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Today on the show, we are going to do the thing. And if you listen to Locked On NFL Scouting, which I'm the co-host with alongside Joe Marino, we've been doing a podcast together for almost 10 years now, which is crazy to think about. But one of the bits that we have on the show is the prospect of do the thing, right? And do the thing is you look at all the teams across the league and you ask yourself a single question and you assess who's in or who's out on something. We're going to do the thing with GM vacancies here on Locked On NFL Scouting today. And the idea of it is this. Who are the Dolphins competing against for a potential executive hire, right? And there's a lot of assumptions that are being made around Mike McDaniel staying, and then by extension, Champ Kelly just getting the interim tag taken off for a year, and so on and so forth. We'll see, right? We've got a 4-week season left to kind of figure out what the path is forward, and I think there would be nothing worse for the Dolphins than to have success in those 4 games and then not still do their due diligence on other candidates. I think you made a split with the idea that you would get a head start on the exploration and discovery process of all of the possible candidates that are out there so that you could do your due diligence and you can actually interview them and make the decision after that point and what is best for the team. But it does start to get interesting because there are arguments to be made, and I think there's some validity to them, that there's some downside elements for an executive coming in year one. Now, the other side of the coin is, well, it's a trim the fat year, an assessment year. It's kind of a free burner year at the front end of your contract to kind of get an assessment of what you have and let everybody who's pre-existing and precedes you prove one way or another whether they deserve to be there or not. So the argument being, well, you're potentially getting brought in to work with a coach who is not your choice, and you're probably looking at coming back with a quarterback that's getting paid second contract money. That's been one of the bigger points of frustration for the team this season, and he's going to be back. And your timeline in that regard is, your time is precious as an executive in the NFL. And if you're going to take a job in a perfect world, everything kind of is on the same page and you get to pick your own guy. And I understand that being a source of apprehension. And I think a lot of the best builds in the NFL, if I'm being honest, there's organizational alignment and everybody's on the same page from the jump and everybody's clocks are running at the same rate. So everybody's running the same race together. I do believe that. But the other side of the coin is, well, if you're the executive that gets to come in and they want you to work with what they have, but you're trusted as the highest on the food chain from a football operation standpoint, you're responsible for running the football operation. Coming in and not having that pressure to perform in that first year for your own job security is huge. Now, you do run the risk of having a lot of sunk cost and opportunity cost if you make picks for players through a certain lens, but then you make scheme changes or you make a head coaching change and you make a quarterback change. And now the skill set of all the players around that quarterback or the skill set of all the players that fit in that scheme, you're not running that scheme anymore. You might, it might hurt your resume as a drafter because you drafted for somebody else's recipe and then you got to change the recipe after just 1 year. And then now 2 years after that, as you're starting to build, they're going to look at that first draft class you had, and they're going to look at it with a side eye and ask, well, why was this bad? Even though there's perfect context as to why it's bad. And that's not to say that it's guaranteed that it would be bad. Some players are transcendent and can go through multiple schemes, and good coaches usually can find pathways for success for a lot of players in different kinds of roles. I'm not super compelled to buy the argument one way or the other than I do know I do generally believe people whose timelines are on the same timetable usually don't have time to start pointing the finger at the other person. And that's the biggest worry, because that was the infighting that we saw for the Dolphins throughout the 2010s, was Jeff Ireland and Tony Sperano and Joe Philbin and Don Aponte and that whole collection and brain trust. And Dennis Hickey gets roped in there because they couldn't hire a GM. That was on that, like they got declined for some interviews. They had a couple job offerings that it was reported were declined before they settled on Dennis Hickey. And that's what you don't want. And that's your worry with Stephen Ross being somebody who's not in the building every single day, is, what does that absence of ownership presence do? And I don't have the answer to this, to perpetuate some of that infighting if you're hitting adversity and people are on different timelines. So that's the risk you run, but also potentially an attractive element for the right person with the right frame of mind. Who's joining the Dolphins in the way of having a general manager vacancy? That is a fascinating question, because you look across the league and it's very feast or famine in the way of records this year, right? There's a lot of teams that are at the top. There's a number of teams that have grossly struggled in the win-loss column this year. There's only, one division with two teams with double-digit losses right now, and that's the NFC East. There's only two other divisions that have two teams with 9 or more losses. That's the NFC South and the AFC North. And obviously Cincinnati is in those shoes because Joe Burrow was down for 2 months of the season. Not that that defense would be any better with Joe Burrow on the field anyway, but there's not a lot of middle class this year, right? 7-6 and 6-7 teams is Miami, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Tampa Bay, Carolina. That's it. Everybody else is at Dallas at 6-6. Either end of the spectrum. So we're going to walk through each one of the teams in the league, talk a little bit about their situation as a team. But you start by who are the teams that are underachieved. And then you look at, okay, what is the tenure of the general manager? What is the situation with the head coach? Who's likely to potentially move on? The list is short. I'll spoil that part of it. We're going to do that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. There's no reason to let the big wireless drain your wallet, especially during the holiday season. Right now, Mint Mobile is running their best deal of the year. All of their unlimited plans are 50% off. That means you can unlock a 3 or 6 or 12-month unlimited premium wireless plan for just $15 a month. It's the easiest way to take your overpriced phone bill and give it the full Scrooge treatment. And what makes it even better now is that Mint makes it so simple to make the switch. There's no contracts, no nonsense, just real savings and real quality service. Switching to Mint lets you keep your same coverage for a lower price, and the service is fast and super reliable, even on the go. Turn your expensive wireless present into a huge wireless savings future by switching to Mint. Shop Mint Unlimited plans at mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. That's mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. Limited time offer. Upfront payment of $45 for a 3-month plan, $90 for a 6-month plan, or $180 for a 12-month plan, $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees, initial plan term only. 35 gigabytes and more may slow when network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com. As we press onward here and we get ready to do the thing for GM situations across the league, I want to thank you all once again for helping to make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And if you are an everydayer, true diehard, you do have the opportunity to take it up another level with the Everydayer Club. You can join the Everydayer Club with Locked On, get ad-free audio access to the Locked On members-only Discord and more, built for all of our most loyal fans. You can get the information in the show description below, but thank you for all of our Everydayers. Let's start in the AFC East, where the Dolphins already have a vacancy at 6-7. The Jets are 3-10. These are the two losing teams in the AFC East right now. And the Jets just hired a GM last year and just traded away Quinn Williams and Sauce Gardner. They're in it for the long haul, right? And that's with Moogie as the GM there. They're not going to fire Moogie after 1 year. The Bills, 9-4. I know there's some frustration there with Brandon Beane. But this team's probably going to win 11 games again. Like, this is generally not the realm in which teams are getting rid of executives. And then New England, obviously, at 11-2, big breakout first year with Mike Vrabel. That power structure is a little unique. Obviously, Elliott Wolf, piece of that puzzle for them. But with the big leap that they've had in wins this year, they're not letting anybody go either. So I would say in the AFC East, it's Miami, and that's it. In the AFC North, Pittsburgh is a model organization in the form of stability. Omar Khan has been the general manager there since Kevin Colbert retired. And, it seems like there's a lot of focus on Mike Tomlin, but there's a lot of reporting that Mike Tomlin won't be fired. It would be if Mike Tomlin wants to choose to move on. But I would be very surprised. Pittsburgh's kind of like Green Bay in that sense of, like, even when it's down, and it might not even be down, right? Like, Pittsburgh could run the table and finish 11-6 and win the AFC North. I hope that doesn't happen because the Dolphins play Pittsburgh. I mean, they could lose on Monday night and then win the next 3 and still win the AFC North, right? Because they already have a head-to-head against Baltimore. They play again in Week 18. Baltimore's an odd one, but I don't think Eric DeCosta is the one that's on the hottest seat. I think John Harbaugh, there's some frustrations with kind of the management of the games, and he used to be really aggressive, and now he's been less aggressive. I think Harbaugh's in a tighter spot than DeCosta because Harbaugh's been there longer, and Eric DeCosta took over for Ozzie Newsome, and Ozzie Newsome was another one of those, like, super long tenured GMs. So those are two teams that are, like, uniquely, historically very stable, that are like, feel like they're frustrated with their seasons. I don't think the general manager is the most at risk for either Pittsburgh or Baltimore. Cincinnati doesn't even technically have a GM, right? It's Duke Tobin's like their executive, but he doesn't have the GM title. And then in Cleveland with Andrew Berry, owners already came out and said, "Hey guys, I stepped in mud here. Everybody bought in on the Deshaun Watson thing. We were in on the Deshaun Watson thing." Stefanski, I think, is probably more at risk as well because the ownership group there in Cleveland, and this is where it's a luxury for me to do the Locked On NFL scouting stuff and have, like, an understanding of, like, each one of the teams a little bit more than just, hey, I watched them on Sunday and this is what they look like, right? That owner is a very analytically driven, like, they had Paul DePodesta, who was with Moneyball in the Oakland A's, and he just left for the Rockies this year. But he was on their staff for like 3 GM regimes. They're very analytically driven, and Andrew Berry, the GM there in Cleveland, I didn't think Andrew Berry was going to be a tongue twister, but here we are, is very much in that school of thought. And they just had a great draft class, and they have a bunch of extra draft capital because they traded down to let the Jags trade up for Travis Hunter. Right? Like, I don't think Andrew Berry's on the hot seat either. Jacksonville, James Gladstone, first-year GM. That team is in first place in the AFC South with 4 games to play. Houston, that team started slow. Caserio there, they've built one of the most ferocious defenses in football. They got a young quarterback who's missed time, and Houston won in spite of missing him. They're going to be a problem in the postseason, Houston is. They need to figure out their offensive line, but that was like their black eye for their approach in the offseason was the offensive line. They tried to overhaul it with a bunch of vets, and it hasn't really come together, but that's a talented team. And I don't see either Jacksonville or Houston. They should be excited, not talking about potential regime changes. And in Indianapolis with Chris Ballard, they just had an ownership transition there when Jim Irsay unfortunately passed away this offseason. So Chris Ballard's been there for a really long time. That team started 7-1, had some bad luck, had DeForest Buckner and now Daniel Jones go down. I'm sure the conversation there is, hey, we feel like we've got a really good team. The injury bug got us. We need to get back on the horse and do it again next year. I don't expect Chris Ballard to be in danger, even as the Colts potentially go from 7-1 to I would not pick them to win any of their last 4 games. So they could go from 7-1 to 8-9. I would not be surprised. But I also would say Chris Ballard with Jim Irsay's daughters kind of now stepping into an ownership group and them just really getting their feet wet and understanding, I don't think they're going to be super eager to make that change. Tennessee, look, they just hired a GM last year. And they've done musical chairs. They desperately need to. They hired Mike Borgonzi from Kansas City. They desperately need organizational stability. Denver, 11-2. Y'all keep doing your thing. You're good, right? The Chargers, 9-4. Bad luck on the offensive line. Probably still going to be a double-digit win team and a playoff team this year. I don't think they're going to be in the conversation either. Kansas City, down year. Brett Veach. We can't possibly say, hey, the nucleus of this team got another year older. We had some major one-score game regression this year. I think Veach probably should start feeling a little uncomfortable, but I would be surprised if after all of the success, the first regression year, they say, hey, we're done here. We're going to go in a different direction. That would surprise me because they've been so good for so long. And Veach has been a part of, I think, some of the deterioration of the roster. Sure. I just don't think the first regression year is going to be the catalyst for change for Kansas City. And then that leaves the Raiders, and they're another team that just made a general manager change, right? They made a switch to put John Spytek from Tampa Bay as the GM this offseason because he was like college roommates with Tom Brady at Michigan on the football team. So Spytek and Brady are like this. Brady just got minority ownership of the team. Now, Pete Carroll, I think he's out of here. So I think you're realistically looking at Miami as the only AFC team with a vacancy in my mind. Now, could you see maybe if the wheels completely fall off for Pittsburgh or Baltimore? Maybe. I think it's a major reach. Did you see maybe Brett Veach if if Clark Hunt's really mad at how bad the season is and what the roster looks like? Maybe, but I doubt it. And the worst teams, 3 of the worst teams, the Jets, the Titans, and the Raiders, all just hired new GMs last year. So that's the AFC side of this. The NFC side of this. Philly, Howie Roseman. Go ahead, Philly. Fire Howie Roseman, right? Not going to happen. Dallas does not have a GM by title. Will McClay is their senior personnel executive, and he just signed a contract extension last year. And Dallas, in some ways, has overachieved this year versus what their defensive depth chart looked like at the beginning of the year. Washington and New York. I think New York is where you get interesting. Adam Peters was just hired not that long ago. Washington's 1 season removed from playing the NFC Championship game, and that was Peters' first season with the team. So Peters has been with the team 2 years. We've had the highest of highs and now the lowest of lows. I don't think you're going to make a knee-jerk reaction change there, especially because it's not Daniel Snyder anymore, right? Josh Harris bought the team. The Giants are one to watch. As Joe Shane survived the initial split with Brian Daboll, but you can tell there's a lot of angst with that organization. The media asking Joe Shane why he survived. Why he's the right person to lead the next group of the team. They have to go through a coaching hiring cycle already. That's already been committed, just like Miami with their GM situation. That's one to watch because Jacksonville was in a similar spot where they were going to keep the GM and hire a new coach, but the coach that they wanted would not come with the GM that they had. So then they axed the GM. The Giants are the first legitimate, yes, they're going to be in the same bucket as the Dolphins, hiring a GM. But they've already made a change and chose to keep the GM. So even then, it's not a shoe-in. Green Bay, Brian Gutekunst takes over for Ted Thompson, who took over from Ron Wolf. They make GM changes like the Steelers make head coaching changes. Model organization stability. Chicago, they're making a major leap this year with the first year under Ben Johnson, but Ryan Poles is the GM there, has been hacking at this roster for a few years and finally got an offensive mind in there to kind of pull all their pieces together. He's not going anywhere. Detroit, maybe a little bit of regression, but their coaching staff got picked over to no end last year. They're not making any changes. That leaves, 9 more teams to get into on the other side of this break. And then we're going to talk about the competition and the teams that we have stamped as, hey, yes, or maybe competition, because I think the list is going to be that short for GM vacancies in addition to the Dolphins. That's all next here, Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time as it unfolds in front of your eyes. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds every drive, every momentum swing, and every highlight moment. You can live bet on FanDuel. It's best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, defense tightens up, momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that update instantly, player props that update as guys heat up, and you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked in on every snap, every drive, and every possibility. So if you want to be on the right side of the action, which is right in the middle of it this season, visit FanDuel and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. All right, let's finish the thing. Minnesota, 5-8. Team has been very good under Kevin O'Connell. The team was exceptional last year, right? When you consider they went 14-3, somehow 14-3 gets you a wild card berth. They're plus 100 in point differential. This is the 4th year under Kevin O'Connell. They've kind of been up and down and up and down. His first year, they're 13-4. Then they're 7-10, but they kind of stay methodical with the roster building, and they kind of understand we've got a lot of work to do. Maybe we overachieved. I mean, they went 13-4 with Kevin O'Connell's first season with a minus 3-point differential. And they're 7-10. They're only 15 points worse in point differential, but they lost 6 last games. And then they go up to a plus 100 point differential or 14-3. They played week 18 against Detroit for a chance at the 1 seed in a bye, and they lose that game. Then they lose in the wild card round. And now this year, 5-8. Obviously, the big change there being they transitioned from Sam Darnold to J.J. McCarthy / Carson Wentz. I don't think, although it is a frustrating roller coaster ride, I think when we look at Kwesi, the GM in Minnesota, I think you could probably start to look at some of the personnel decisions, be that the J.J. McCarthy decision, be that the decision to let Sam Darnold walk, be that a lot of the free agency moves that they made this offseason with Ryan Kelly and the bag that he got and Will Fries and the bag that he got, and they loaded up on some defensive linemen that are long in the tooth guys too, like Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen. And I think you can look at some of that, and then obviously the quarterback decision, and you can ask yourself, how well has it worked out? Minnesota's got 16 touchdown passes and 19 interceptions this season. J.J. McCarthy's completing 56% of his passes. They have to do something to bridge this situation at quarterback. But I don't think it's going to come so fast for them that the first year out, Kwesi's going to get the boot. I think they're probably going to have to, kind of similar to Miami, have a hedge to their starting quarterback, find a cost-effective opportunity to do that, although they're a little bit more free to spend because they're not paying J.J. McCarthy's second contract like the Dolphins are paying Tua. I would be surprised if Kwesi, but I think his standing, like he's got a very high reputation as an executive, and obviously they've got 2 13-plus win seasons under their belt in 4 years there. That's going to help. But the roller coaster ride is real for them, and they're 5-8 right now. I don't think that spot will be open, though. Tampa Bay with Jason Light, one of my favorite GMs across the league. They have, 5 straight division titles or something like that in the NFC South. I think they'll be just fine. Carolina, big breakout season for them. They're sitting at 7-6. They're tied. They've got 2 games head-to-head against the Bucs. in the final month of the season. They have a chance if they take care of business and really win those 2 games, they will win the NFC South, right? Because if they win both of those, even if they lose the other 2 and Tampa wins their other 2 games, which would include a win over the Dolphins, they'd both have 9 wins if they go 2-2, and Carolina would have won both games against Tampa Bay. Like, that's on the table for them. You're not going to fire an executive off for the season like that when they've already won as many games as Carolina won the last 2 seasons combined. I think your most likely candidate out of all the teams, including the Giants, is up next with Atlanta. When you consider Terry Fontenot has been the general manager in Atlanta, this is his 5th season. They've never won more than 8 games. They've gone 7-10, 7-10, 7-10, 8-9. Now they're 4-9 with 4 games left to play. He may have the most amount of losses in a season he's ever had. They don't have a first-round draft pick because they traded in the last year's draft to go get a second pass rusher. The Michael Penix situation looks shaky at best. And that was, we're going to sign Kirk Cousins to this big contract. Then we're also going to draft Penix, but then we're going to hold on to Cousins and we're going to eat a bunch of extra money that we didn't need to and guarantees money for 2026. That's been bungled at pretty much every turn, in my opinion. So I think the Falcons have a very good chance at being the next vacancy we see at general manager. New Orleans, Mickey Loomis, who's the GM there, has been there for like 20-something years. Gail Benson's the owner of the team, is the wife of the late Tom Benson, who owned the team prior. And Gail Benson's on the record talking about how Mickey Loomis taught her everything she knows about football, because when she met Tom Benson, like she didn't watch football. Mickey Loomis is like third in the will to execute Gail Benson's desires for what to do with the football team and the community in New Orleans. He's not going anywhere. He's not going anywhere. That leaves 3 teams that are 9-4 or better in the NFC West, plus Arizona, who I think Jonathan Gannon has a lot more holes in his resume as the head coach than what Monty Ossenfort does as the GM. And Ossenfort came in before all the Kyler Murray stuff was handed out. You're legitimately looking. I'd be surprised if we have 4 total vacancies for GMs this year. If I were a betting man, I'd have it down for 2. Miami, which is already established and known, and Atlanta. Maybe New York, Giants. I'd say that's a coin toss. But those are the teams you're competing with, because as we did on the AFC side, all the worst teams hired GMs last year. 3 of them, the Jets, the Titans, and the Raiders, they all hired a GM last year. So now you're looking at Atlanta at 4-9 and Miami at 6-7, and the Giants potentially at 2-11. The Giants and the Falcons have quarterbacks on rookie contracts. Jackson Dart has looked the best out of those 2 players. The Giants also are in a position where they get to hire a head coach at the same time to be on the same timeline. I think that's helpful for the Giants. But here's the deal about the Giants and their organization as we look at these 3 teams and compare their resumes and like where there's risk and reward. Here's where I think Stephen Ross's willingness to be patient and let this thing play out is going to pay itself off. I want to go back to 2016, and it's just coaches, but this is an embodiment of the situation. And Miami's not that dissimilar, but Stephen Ross, I think, has been much better at this in recent years. Ben McAdoo was hired in 2016. He did not survive the first 2 seasons with the team. And that included being 11-5 and being a playoff team his first year. So he went 11-5 his first season, did not make it to the end of his second season. Pat Shurmur made it 2 years. Joe Judge made it 2 years. Brian Daboll made it longer. He made it 3.5. But the team got worse every single year. The New York media, like we think Miami's fans and media is crazy. New York's a totally different animal. So yes, you have a quarterback, but you have an organization that from a stability standpoint has not been stable the last decade at all, versus Miami, Like Chris Greer, if you're looking at it exclusively through a GM perspective, Chris got 10 years. So in the time in which the Giants had Ben McAdoo, interim Steve Spagnuolo, Pat Shurmur, Joe Judge, Brian Daboll, interim Mike Kafka, 6 head coaches, the Dolphins have had 1 executive with the title of GM, Chris Greer. So if you're hiring an executive, I think that's a feather in the cap for the Dolphins relative head-to-head. Now, the Giants, again, they have a quarterback on a rookie deal that's shown a lot of promise. They've got some dynamic young players. Right? They've got Abdul Carter. They've got Malik Neighbors. They spent in free agency. I think the 1 through 22 on their roster, when you project it to 2026, they've got more players with second contracts that you would associate it like, okay, we assume this guy's going to be a starter. The Dolphins have more young players that are growing and developing, and I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. But the Giants just got through a splurge in free agency where they bought Paulson Adebo. They bought Javon Holland, right? They spent handsomely to try to raise the floor of the roster. But organizational stability and patience of the ownership group, I think, is something that the Dolphins can point to and say, look how we handled. Look, we didn't want to fire Brian Flores, but he couldn't get on with our quarterback, and the relationships that he had with everybody else in the building were so untenable, and he was pushing for Deshaun Watson to be traded for. The Atlanta Falcons, I would point to draft capital. Because the Atlanta Falcons, if you use the NFL trade value charts, the Dolphins currently rank 10th in draft capital, and that's with 5 top 100 picks. You also have your own 4th-round pick. You have your own 5th-round pick. You potentially have a compensatory 4, depending on what plays out with a couple of players on your contract here under contract in the last 4 weeks of the season and how much they play. You've got a Javon Holland compensatory 4 that's on the line. Larry Borum's already fallen out, so we need like Nick Westbrook-Akine to stop playing in favor of Cedric Wilson. Like that has to happen if the Dolphins are going to get a compensatory 4. That's neither here nor there. The Falcons do not have a first-round pick. If the draft started today, the Falcons would have 42, 73, 110, 192, 24. And that team also ranks in the bottom 8 in cap space for 2026. I mean, you talk about the Dolphins not having resources. Falcons have a worse resource situation than the Dolphins do right now because they emptied the bag for James Pierce. And you are also probably in a situation where like it's no shoe-in that Raheem Morris gets fired, which would put that vacancy in the same spot where the Dolphins are probably going to be in with Mike McDaniel. Raheem Morris has been here this is his 3rd season. Now they did not get, but they got, excuse me, this is his 2nd season. His first season in Atlanta was as an interim in 2020. So this is year 2 for Raheem Morris. You're going to move on from a coach after 2 years? Teams do it. I wouldn't take it off the table, but I don't think it's a shoo-in. It makes it all very, very interesting, but we've done the thing. If I were betting, the Dolphins are going to be competing with 1-2 teams max for GM candidates. And I think there's arguments and things that you could present, even with the warts that the Dolphins situation has from like things that are committed to in 2026, that will put you as the more attractive option of the 2 or 3 that are out there. Kyle Krabs, you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your Wednesday. I'll be back to talk to you all again soon. Go Fins.